What's your I am responsible for someone passing away story? Story 1. I was driving from a friend's house last November on a road I've driven a million times. I knew one area was particularly dark at night because the city hadn't replaced the street lights in over a decade. The dark area also crests a hill in a residential area between two crosswalks that are far apart. So people cross the road at the top of this hill. Knowing all this, I still never saw him coming. There was a huge thud, and my window was cracked all the way across. I turned around and saw him laying motionless on the sidewalk. It was late and no one else was there, so it was just me, parked on a side street, and this body. I checked his pulse while I was on the phone with 911, but couldn't feel anything because I was shaking so badly. This was maybe a quarter mile from the hospital, so the paramedics were there before I even realized what happened. They put him on a stretcher with this strange device that I found out later was to automatically compress his chest. The cops showed up and I finally saw my car with a flashlight. There was a large chunk of flesh and blood caught on the side of my car. I passed my sobriety test and they took me home. He lived for 3 days before passing due to complications of the accident and was never conscious during that time. I found out through a friend of mine who's the editor at a local paper that the police were still considering charges. Also, how I found out that he passed. I was obviously a mess about the accident, but also the possibility of involuntary manslaughter. After the officer called to tell me officially that he passed, I consulted a lawyer and was basically told not to talk to the police again and to let them conduct their investigation. 2 grueling weeks later, I got a phone call at midnight from the officer who gave me my sobriety test. He worked third shift. He told me that the guy was incredibly intoxicated and basically stepped into oncoming traffic without paying attention. With that info, I wasn't to be charged and I could go pick my car back up. The relief I felt was indescribable, but also terrible that I could feel so great in a situation where someone passed. What made that feeling worse was that the officer told me the family of the guy were super concerned with how I was doing, and that they wanted to tell me they didn't blame me. He was 24 and had just graduated college. It was his last night in town before going back to his hometown. I go to his Facebook page every once in a while just so I don't forget what he looked like. It's understandable that you were so shaken up after the accident, and it must have been incredibly stressful waiting to hear if you would be charged with involuntary manslaughter. I'm so glad that the police were able to determine that the young man who was hit was intoxicated and stepped into oncoming traffic without paying attention. I hope that you've been able to find some peace in knowing that they don't hold you responsible for what happened. Story 2. I'm at least partially responsible for 3 passings. So, I'm a weather forecaster. A few years ago, I was forecasting for Afghanistan. Now, we were doing these forecasts from a base in the States, which means we had to coordinate our forecast with someone who was deployed to Afghanistan. Sometimes the downrange forecaster was really experienced, other times they weren't. It was a mixed bag. Anyway, I had been forecasting for this region for at least 2 years at the time of this incident. I was familiar with it, and I was actually in a supervisory capacity, simply overseeing all of the forecasts going out in my zone. Well, one day I was talking with one of my forecasters about the potential for large hail and how I'd like him to put that in his forecast. Now, that's a big thing to put in a forecast because of how operationally significant it is. Aircraft must be put in hangars, missions are canceled, assets must be protected, etc. So when it came time to discuss this with the downrange forecaster, he was absolutely against it. He didn't want to brief that to the commander because, again, missions have to be canceled based on what you think will happen. If you're wrong, you've set back a lot of people and wasted a lot of time. So the deployed forecaster tries to argue against it, but his reasoning really just boiled down to, I don't want to brief that. So when I wasn't looking, he essentially just pulled rank on my junior forecaster and forced him to take it out of the forecast. And so it went out to the base with no hail in it, only hinting at some nearby thunderstorms. Well, when I noticed, I was ticked, but I said forget it. We'll let him be wrong. This was the first time I'd ever wanted to put large hail in a forecast. Maybe we were over forecasting it. Nope. Basically, right on schedule. A huge thunderstorm popped up and dumped large hail on the base. It did a few million in damage to aircraft. injured a helo pilot who was pre-flighting his bird, and unalived 3 Afghan National Army soldiers who had left on a patrol and couldn't find any cover. They wound up beaten to death by hail. That's always bugged me. They didn't need to perish. We knew the potential was there, and I basically just let an incorrect forecast go out that got them unalived. It's unfortunate that the downgrade forecaster didn't want to put large hail in the forecast, especially when you had some experience with the area and knew the potential for danger. It's frustrating when someone pulls rank and forces a decision that could have such serious consequences. It's clear that you care deeply about what happened and wish that things had turned out differently. It's important to remember that you can't change the past, but you can learn from it and use that knowledge to make better decisions in the future. Story 3. I used to work a strange overnight schedule. 10-hour shifts Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. I try to keep awake the same hours on my days off, especially on Thursdays. This was a pretty rural area, so there wasn't much open at those hours except a gas station that had a tiny cafe area. I didn't want to keep people in the house awake, so I spent a lot of time at the gas station. I'd usually read or talk with a cashier on duty. I think she felt a little safer having someone else there, too. One night, a man comes in with a little boy and asks if they can use the bathroom. It's something like 3 a.m. The kid looks sick or uncomfortable. To me, it looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. After they're in the bathroom, the cashier and I look at each other. She thinks there's something off about this, too. I went outside to get a description of the vehicle. After they leave, we call the police. The local police passed it along to the county sheriff's department, and a local officer came to the gas station. He asked us a couple more questions, and we listened to his radio to hear what was happening. A county officer spots the truck and pulls it over. After the officer gets out of the car, the truck backs into it and takes off. The police pursue him. We didn't get a lot of details after that. He crashed or abandoned the truck. The truck was on fire and loose rounds of ammunition were going off in the truck. I believe the boy was somewhere safe because I didn't hear any more about him. The guy tried to swim across a small but deceptively treacherous river, and he drowned. That was close to 20 years ago. If I remember correctly, he was the boy's dad, but did not have custody. He was recently released from prison, and the truck was stolen. It takes a lot of courage to call the police when something doesn't feel right, and I'm glad you were able to get a description of the truck and help the police track it down. It's incredible to think that the situation escalated to such a dangerous level, with the truck backing into the police car and then catching fire with loose rounds of ammunition inside. I'm relieved to hear that the boy was safe and wasn't hurt during this ordeal. Story 4. War survivor from Chechnya 94-96 war. I told a girl, maybe 17 years old, to run out from the apartment building because I was so sure it was going to collapse. It didn't collapse, and she ran out into a hail of gunfire and expired. I was so scared that I stayed in the building, and it just never collapsed the entire time. So I left out the back. I often think about that. It was such a quick decision. She was right near the door. I was on my way out because the building felt like it was shaking. And I saw her and said, "Run out, the roof is gonna fall." And she ran out in a hurry and got blown apart by gunfire, shrieking in pain until she was hit again and presumably expired. I wish I didn't tell her that, obviously. It still sort of haunts me to this day, especially her screaming. But I also know that I made the decision in goodwill, trying to save her life. And to be fair, the building really felt like it was going to collapse, and everyone was running out, not just me. Anybody would have told her to run as well. Nobody knew they were opening fire on the building. I know it sounds like lame justifications, but it's all I can think of to help ease my mind. Anybody would have done the same. I hope, at least. The people that shot her are to blame, not the person who tried to save her. Story 5. I was skiing with my friends on a school trip. As we went to sit on the chairlift, our skis locked. The way that happened meant that one of my friends ended up sitting on top of the other. The lift operator didn't stop the lift, and we couldn't get off by the time we realized what was happening. It was my job to pull the ski bar down, but I couldn't due to the positioning of people in the lift. Long story short, my friend ended up slipping, and I was holding onto her as she dangled off the lift. I was wearing thick skiing gloves, so my grip on her was loose. She was screaming so much, but she stopped for a second, looked me in the eye, and said, "Please don't let go." And then my grip gave in, and she fell about 4 stories into some rocks near a river. We were shouting at the lift operator, but he was too slow to react. The girl expired from internal bleeding and shock, as her legs twisted in a up way when she landed. She went into cardiac arrest and expired. I was questioned profusely by the police and was treated as a suspect. I was bullied endlessly, both online and in real life. In the end, I blamed myself, and I still do to this day. This really is the nutshell version, but out of respect to people involved, I won't give any details, since it was only 4 or 5 years ago. Sounds like that's 100% the lift operator's fault. Oh my goodness, what a traumatic experience. I can only imagine the pain and guilt you must have felt after that incident. It's heartbreaking to hear that your friend lost her life in such a terrible way. I hope that you're able to find peace and healing, and that you can eventually let go of the guilt you feel. Your friend's death was a terrible accident, and it's important to remember that accidents happen, even when we try our best to prevent them.
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 6. My mom is Thai and my dad is American, so I spend most of the year in the US and summers in Thailand. When I was 8, my family and my cousin's family were at the beach in Cha'am. My cousin's son James and I had been playing in the ocean for hours by this time, and we were both exhausted. Since we began playing, the water got much more violent with large waves as a thunderstorm was starting. As soon as my parents heard lightning, they yelled for us to come back to the shore, and I just started swimming back without checking to see if James was following. When I walked up onto the sand, I looked back, and I couldn't see him. We were much farther out than 2 8-year-olds should have been, and James was too tired to keep himself above the water. I'm not sure what I could have done once I realized I couldn't find him, but I can't stop thinking about it. And when I go back to the condo there, I can't bring myself to get back into the ocean. It's a horrible situation, and I feel for you, but it's unlikely that you could have saved James. Chances are you'd have come to harm as well. I really hope you'll be okay. It's natural to wonder if there was something you could have done differently to prevent what happened. However, it's important to remember that the ocean can be a dangerous place, especially during a thunderstorm with large waves. It's unlikely that you could have saved James without putting yourself in harm's way as well. It's a tragic situation, but please don't blame yourself for what happened. Story 7. My wife and I were both very sick with the flu. My father watched our 2 small children and even came to sit with me in the hospital. The day after I got out of the hospital, he got the flu and passed away a couple days later. I still feel guilty knowing that he didn't have to sit with my children, or that he didn't have to sit by my bedside, but he did. It helps knowing that he loved me so much that he was willing to put his life at risk to be with me. I just never imagined that the flu could have been so serious to be hospitalized, much less perish someone. I hold myself responsible, and I feel guilty for getting him sick. He got to spend his last few days with his grandkids and helping his child through a rough patch. If you could ask him, I bet he wouldn't regret his decisions at all. Story 8. My friend was a well-known and liked guy. Very social. Did drama, football, and baseball in high school. Some of my best moments of my life were with him. One day, he just stopped coming around. He would read my messages but not reply. He ignored anyone else. It was so bizarre. One day, he came to my house, and it was like the good old days. He said he got into target shooting, but his gun blew up because he fired a bullet that had been in the washing machine. He had some powder burns on his hands. He asked to borrow one of my guns, and I said yes. 2 days later, he shot himself with it. I've hated myself since. Most of our mutual friends hate me. His family hates me, and I was barred from his funeral. I feel so bad I didn't see the signs. I miss you, Tom. I wish I could have helped you like you did me. I don't understand why anyone would remotely have a reason to blame you, nor should you blame yourself. If he didn't borrow yours, he could have gotten a gun anywhere, or just used any other method. I'm so sorry to hear about your friend, and the pain and the guilt you've been carrying since his passing. It must have been incredibly difficult to watch him pull away from you and your mutual friends without any explanation. I hope you're able to find some peace and healing in the coming months and years. It's understandable that you miss your friend and wish you could have done more to help him, but please don't carry the weight of his passing on your shoulders. You were a good friend to him, and that's what matters. Story 9. I was dating this girl that was a little dysfunctional due to being abused by her grandpa, and nobody knew about it. I noticed some red flags and got her to open up and tell me about it. After we broke up, I told her mom she should stop inviting Grandpa over to Thanksgiving dinners due to the abuse. The mom called me a liar, but after asking the other daughters/cousins about it, they confirmed it was true and that they had all been violated too. After word got back to Grandpa, she said, "I'll take care of it." Fast forward a week, and Grandpa is expired. Apparently, Grandpa had a lot of serious medication he was taking, and Grandma messed with the dosage, which unalived him. His death was ruled natural cause, and nothing ever happened to Grandma. Perhaps even Grandma was abused herself, and that could be what drove her to do it. Story 10. When I was 16 years old, I hit an 87-year-old man after he ran a stop sign. I was with him holding his hand when he perished on the sidewalk. He had a heart attack. They weren't able to determine if he had a heart attack before the accident, which would explain why he blew through the stop sign, or if he had one as a result. His family was very gracious, and I'm very grateful for them. His son called me the day after it happened and told me his mom had perished 6 months prior. His dad had been very depressed, and while they were sad he perished this way, they were happy to think their parents were reunited. To hold a stranger's hand in his final moments. You are a beautiful person. I hope you're okay now. Story 11. When I was 18, I was working the night shift in a nursing home as an aide. Part of my job was to turn the paralyzed patients every 2 hours to make sure they didn't get bed sores, etc. This one particular resident had late-stage Parkinson's disease, and her muscles and joints were stiff and brittle, and she was catatonic. As I was flipping her from one side to another, I applied light pressure to her leg to move her back a bit, and this snapped her femur. Given her age and health, the doctors decided that surgery was dangerous and she would have to heal on its own, if at all. Because of this, we could no longer flip her, which resulted in bed sores. She eventually went septic from those bed sores and died of septic shock. I always felt so bad about that. That seems like it should have definitely been at least a 2-person job. I hope that you've been able to find some peace and healing in the years since this happened. It's a difficult situation to come to terms with, but know that you did the best you could under difficult circumstances. Story 12. I was supposed to meet a friend to head to soccer practice, but he wasn't there when I got to where we were supposed to meet. I got impatient and decided to head to practice myself. He never got there, so I assumed he was sick or something. 2 days later, my mom told me he got hit by a car and died after running out in the street to get a ball he was kicking while waiting for me. The timing of things seems like if I had waited just a minute longer, he wouldn't have had to wait for me and would have lived. Story 13. Turn left into my sister's driveway at 3 a.m. A guy on a Harley was doing 60 miles per hour in a 30, with no headlight. My half-ton pickup left 4 feet of skid marks from being pushed back by the force. I still remember seeing him do mid-air somersaults. This was 1976.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.